Now we're going to look at a few basic things that you can do and learn from the information we just discussed. And they're called ratios, remember math class, which is a very simple analysis that will answer some very important questions. So the first ratio we are going to talk about is called current ratio. And the current ratio basically answers the question, during 1 year, how do resources that could be converted to cash, which are called current assets, compare to the liabilities that will come in during the year, the current liabilities. And this is also called your organization's liquidity. The formula is very simple. Current assets divided by current liabilities. The answer should be over 1.0, best if it's between 1.5 to 2. Anything lower definitely is a red flag. The next ratio is called the days cash ratio, which answers the question that sadly all nonprofits have suddenly had to deal with, is how long could the nonprofit continue if cash were suddenly shut off? Until this class, I had always thought this was a very theoretical, hypothetical question. Sadly, it is now a very real question. The formula is cash on hand, which is your bank, your short-term investments, etc., multiplied by 365 days a year, and it's divided by your operating expenses except for depreciation. Cash times 365 divided by operating expenses. And the answer for that is literally the number of days your organization could continue if the cash were suddenly shut off. 10 or less is concerning, but as we've all learned now, suddenly the time needed could be much longer than 10 days. The next ratio is called the days receivable ratio, and this is analyzing your accounts receivable, the size and the nature of the bills that are owed to your organization. And will tell you how long on average it is taking your organization to collect its bills. Now, of course, that's not entirely up to you. If you have state contracts, donor pledges, these are not bills that you can get paid just because you've decided to ask for it, but it's still an important thing to know. The formula is your accounts receivable times 365 divided by your operating revenue. So the answer will be the number of days it takes to receive payment. The next formula is called total margin, and this is considered the true bottom line of your organization. It's also considered the profitability indicator, and we will discuss later that nonprofits do in fact create profit. The question will be later how it is used, but this will be your profitability indicator. The formula is very simple: revenue minus expenses divided by revenue. Now, of course, the higher the figure, the better, but be aware that if in one particular year your organization got a surprisingly huge grant that is not going to be repeated, not typical, this figure will not really tell you your ongoing true margin. So the next figure is an operating margin, which just looks at operating revenue and operating expenses and ignores all your money from fundraising, dividends, and their associated expenses. So it avoids the problem of your results being skewed by that one-time large donation. And the formula is operating revenue minus operating expenses divided by operating revenue. So because it's not going to include all your donation money, fundraising, etc., it's going to show what your organization's dependence on donations is. Now, that's not at all a bad thing to be dependent on donations. Many nonprofits are practically entirely donation driven, but at least it'll make it clear. Now, let's take a look for a moment at the audit. It's a term everybody's probably familiar with, but let's just look a little bit at what it is. So very simply, the audit is an independent look at your organization's financial records. It's an examination by someone who is not connected to your organization and can only be conducted by a licensed certified public accountant. Depending on the size and the sources of funding, your organization may be required by the federal or state government to conduct regular audits. And the audit is going to look at your organization's financial records, its accounts, its business transactions, its accounting practices, and its internal controls. And it is going to determine if, in fact, all of these are adhering to what's known as generally accepted accounting principles, if these, in fact, are being conducted in correct standard ways. And generally accepted accounting principles are usually known as GAAP, G-A-A-P. The audit will also include an opinion, which may be one of the most important parts of the audit, stating if the auditor believed that the financial statements are accurate. The audit will include a discussion of any related party transactions, and an example of that would be if the CEO of the organization rents his or her personal property to the nonprofit. That is in itself not illegal and certainly not necessarily unethical, but it could be. It could easily be misused, so it must be reported. The audit will look at your organization's borrowing. All the long-term indebtedness must be disclosed, but also lines of credit, which are standing loans that many organizations have for short-term immediate needs, particularly to cover months of cash flow deficit. The audit will look at the interest rates that are being charged to your organization by the bank. Typically, the interest rates should be 1.5% of prime, but if the bank is charging a higher interest rate, that may very well show that they consider your organization a credit risk, which is something the auditor would want to know. And it will look at the purposes of borrowing. If this organization has a history of frequent borrowing to cover debt, that is certainly concerning. If it has patterns of long-term indebtedness, that is something the auditor is going to flag. The audit will also want to note any pending lawsuits, because a successful lawsuit against the organization could mean that in the near future there's going to be a significant change in your finances. Now, lawsuits against nonprofits are very common in this country. Anybody can and may very well sue anybody. So the audit is going to look at what it values to be the merits of the suit, how likely they think that this lawsuit is going to be moving forward and taken seriously. If there are frivolous suits against the organization by a disgruntled client and there's no merit to them, they will not be concerned, but they will be looking to see if there's a possibility that this lawsuit could move forward and the organization could suddenly have to make a huge payout. Now, why would a nonprofit choose to have an audit, or why is an audit a good thing to have done regularly? A successful audit will be very important for maintaining the donor trust so that your donors, corporate, foundation, individuals can look at the audit and feel confident that this is a well-run establishment. The audit will assist the board of directors to have confidence in the fiscal management of your organization. Some donors and foundations may require an audit in order to make their contributions. And interestingly, an audit will also provide you with some very useful information, tools, and strategies to better help protect your organization against any possible fraud in the future.